Hello, my name is Monica, and today I'm going to tell you more about my story. I grew up on a little farm in the northern prairies, right on the edge of the Canadian Shield. It was so remote that maybe 5 or 10 vehicles would drive past our house in the day. And when we went to town, we would wave at everybody we met because we probably knew them. There was like coyotes and wolves and cougars and bears all around nearby. My dad had a small grain farm and hog farm, and when I wasn't helping with chores and the garden, I spent lots of time outside and lots of time reading. And I grew up Mennonite. I grew up Holdeman Mennonite, a very small segment of the Mennonites, approximately 27,000 members worldwide. They're very close-knit, kind of tribal. We had our own school, so I went to a little 3-room schoolhouse with 30 kids. So there was 12 kids in my class, 8 to 12 kids in my class, and one other kid in my grade for most of my years growing up. And I only went to grade 9 because they wanted to have as little education as possible because they didn't want to have too much connection with the world. That was sort of the main aim for them, is to stay separate from the world and to create their own culture. I was always very artistic, and I loved to write poetry. I wrote my first story when I was 6 years old, and I couldn't even write, so I dictated it to my teacher. I loved to draw. I learned to paint. But I couldn't dance, because dancing wasn't allowed. And I couldn't play piano. And I really wished that I could. I wanted to play piano so badly. Musical instruments weren't allowed, and they didn't allow TV or radio. They had many restrictions on dress, and when I became baptized, then I had to wear a black head covering on the back of my head every day for as long as I was a member. I think growing up and spending so much time in nature really soothed me and healed me, because nature was one place where I could be myself, where I was accepted for who I was. I could be whoever I was, and that was fine. Then one day when I was 16 years old, I got a shock because I heard that 2 of my friends from the youth group had died in a car accident. And that started to make me think deeper. And then 4 months later, my family and I moved halfway across Canada, farther south. And I was excited to do that because I wanted to create closer friendships. I thought we were moving to a small congregation, so I thought maybe we would be more able to make close friendships because it was like more one-on-one. The congregation I grew up in was about 200 members, which is a good size too. But when we got here, I realized that I had a lot to learn about relationships. When I left the place that I grew up in and everything I was familiar with, and I moved to a new place with people with new habits, and I didn't know how to relate. They seemed to be more strict. Some of the Mennonite congregations are more strict than others, the Holdeman Mennonites. And I was not comfortable with how strict it was. But an hour away was a very lenient, we call it liberal congregation. But they weren't political at all. They didn't vote. And so we would visit there. And my dad started a business, and he got the internet. And that started to expose us to many ideas that we had not thought of before. through the internet we were exposed to a kind of counseling that was very loving. And as Mennonites, we weren't really allowed or encouraged to take psychological counseling. We were supposed to just stay in the church. And I think because of so many of the restrictions that I grew up in, I had depression for quite a few years. At least a decade, I think, kind of on and off. I was depressed, pressed down. I was weighed down by all of the restrictions on myself. So when I was young, I thought I would be a Holdeman Mennonite for the rest of my life. That was my plan. But I started to realize that I was so depressed that I couldn't even be a successful Holdeman. And at the time, all of my family was going to see a local doctor about depression. And the doctor mentioned something about how he tends to see a lot of Mennonites for depression. And that was a light bulb for my parents, but also for me. And I remember walking home after that meeting, like in the bright sunshine, walking down the sidewalk back to our house and realizing that I might not be a Mennonite for the rest of my life. And during that time, we moved an hour away to that more liberal congregation. And in that time, I started my first job, and I stopped going to church when one of the very nice preachers was benched. So earlier I was going to church every other Sunday when I knew that he would preach. And when he was benched, I stopped going to church because I had panic attacks in church. So I couldn't go. I stopped going, and they were very worried for me. They sent me lots of flowers. I still did a little bit with the youth for a while, and I worked with some Holdeman Mennonites. But I slowly started to transition to becoming a worldly person. But I had no plan in mind. I didn't know where I was going to go and where I was going to end up, because I had learned to be so afraid of the worldly people, and slowly I was learning that they weren't as scary as I thought. So I slowly started wearing skirts and t-shirts instead of dresses, wearing bracelets. And then the day that I stopped wearing a head covering and I wore a ponytail to work was so momentous for me. But nobody said a word. I didn't really receive much pushback. They always wanted us to come back to the church because the way they believed, we were going to go to hell if we left. So I started going to counseling, and I started studying psychology for myself. I had the internet. The internet is full of articles on psychology, and I sorted through it. I learned to sort through the internet based on what worked for me. Like, this thing worked in the past, so I think that something similar to it might work now, and I slowly built on that. And for me, it was a natural progression to start studying spirituality. You could call it New Age spirituality. Maybe that's what it is called. I don't know. I wasn't specifically going for that. I was just expanding beyond the structures of the Christian religion. Because when you live so restricted, and then once you start opening, you just open and open and open. And you just like expand it and expand. So as I started changing my beliefs about the world, all the beliefs that I learned as a Mennonite, and I started changing my spiritual beliefs, so many beliefs, I knew what it was like to hold opposite beliefs at the same time and feel that tension. That's part of the process of changing beliefs. I slowly started to come out of my depression, and I couldn't work for a couple of years. I was so depressed and still afraid of the world. The world is so strange. I felt like such an alien, like I didn't belong anywhere because I left the culture that I grew up in, and I didn't belong to this new Western culture. The culture that I grew up in was very collectivist, and I feel now like I often resonate with Eastern cultures a lot more than the Western. But I really appreciate the freedom to be individual that I find here in the West. So I started to learn more about the world I started working with kids, and it was interesting because I got a peek into what is a public school like, what are worldly families like, how do people interact with each other, and I felt so alien at first, but I slowly got more comfortable over time. And I started dating after a while. It took me a while because I needed to be healthy within myself. And also I would explore community. I'd go to events. Sometimes go to events from meetup around the community. I started studying authentic relating. I was always interested in communicating and how to relate with other people better. And I loved authentic relating because it gave me such freedom, and it was so much permission, and permission to be myself around other people, and also it gave me the experience of being appreciated for that. You know, sharing things that I thought people would judge. And it was so freeing. It healed me in a different way than counseling could have, because this was voluntary. These people wanted to hear about me, and I appreciated that so much. I've also always been interested in understanding human history, like our place in the world, you know, because before I didn't feel like the human history belonged to me. It was other people's history. It was the worldly history. And mine, I had Mennonite history, but I didn't feel like the world belonged to me, or I belonged to the world. And I started to study my ancestors a lot. It felt like they were knocking on my door. They really wanted me to study them. And eventually over time I needed to have more distance, and I needed to let them be in the past, and I'm here. But I really was fascinated with understanding my ancient ancestors pre-Christian. And I started studying that, especially because of my connection to nature. I loved their connection to the land, and I started celebrating some of the celebrations that they did at certain times of the year, at all the solstices and the equinoxes, and then halfway in between. And I have learned so much about the way nature's cycles are mirrored within my own body and within my own life. And every season I learn a little bit more about how to be a part of life. You know, I find that when I see these patterns in myself mirrored out in the world, when I find connections between me and the world, that's how I feel like I belong. And I also started studying psychic energy work. So I was always energetically sensitive, and I've become more so over the past couple of years. And over my time of healing, I would focus on the physical healing. What does my body physically need? I would focus on what do I mentally need, what do I emotionally need, what do I spiritually need. And the psychic healing work kind of brought some of those together. It was like working underneath the emotions and the thoughts, and it was working at a deeper level. And it was it acknowledges the connection of everything. It helps me to honor my individuality, and in doing so, with a healthy individuality, I feel like I naturally feel more integrated into the world and able to connect better and more deeply. And my life currently is about continual exploration and self-expression, especially in my art. I feel very passionately about art because of being so restricted in my expression when I was growing up. And I feel like art is our duty to the world. This self came to exist, and its expression is its highest gift to the universe. And I'm continually learning how to express myself more authentically, more truly, always the truer and truer truth. And I support and welcome everybody to join me. I would love to see the whole world being more and more authentic to their inner self, to their authentic self, to their essence. I hope you enjoyed this video, and feel free to check out the rest of my channel. Thank you. One thing I totally forgot to tell you is one of the most important aspects of my journey, and that has been dance and bodywork. So within a year after I left the Mennonites, I started going to dance lessons, and that was a fun little rebellion because I wasn't allowed to do that when I was young. And my dance teacher slowly taught me the bodywork as well, and that has taught me to love my body in a way that I never could when I was a Mennonite. It has helped me to embrace my body and really come into my body and accept that I have a body, like really love it and be in relationship with it. And that is so opposite of how I grew up. And I'm so grateful for this bodywork. I would not be where I am today without it.